The house was always quiet at this hour. When Richard Hale, a self-made millionaire, unlocked the front door without alerting anyone, he expected the same silence he'd grown used to, echoing hallways, polished floors, and a sense of distance that money had never managed to fill. His flight had landed early. Meetings had been canceled. For once, he wanted to surprise his daughters. Richard stepped inside, loosening his tie. The scent of fresh bread drifted through the air, unexpected, warm. He paused. The maid, Maria, usually finished her duties by late afternoon. Yet the house felt alive in a way it rarely did. Soft voices floated from the living room. Children's laughter. Richard slowed his steps. Peering around the corner, he froze. Maria sat cross-legged on the rug, her worn apron folded neatly beside her. In front of her were Richard's 7-year-old twin daughters, Lily and Emma, sitting wide-eyed, their expensive dresses forgotten as they leaned forward in rapt attention. Maria wasn't cleaning. She was teaching. And when someone falls, Maria said gently, holding a small piece of bread, you don't ask who they are or what they have. You help first. That's what makes you rich in the ways that matter. The girls nodded seriously. But Daddy says being rich means working hard, Emma said. Maria smiled kindly. That's true. But kindness is also work, the hardest kind. Richard's breath caught. He had hired Maria years ago for her efficiency, her silence, her ability to blend into the background. He had never asked about her life, never imagined her sitting here shaping his daughters' hearts. Maria passed the bread to the girls and continued, this bread is for sharing. If you have 2 pieces and someone has none, you don't have 2, you have a responsibility. Lily hesitated. Even if they're strangers? Yes, Maria replied. Especially then. Richard felt something shift inside him. He thought of the long hours he spent building his empire, the expensive toys he bought his daughters to make up for his absence, the lessons he assumed money alone could teach. He took an unconscious step forward. The floor creaked. Maria looked up and went pale when she saw him standing there. Sir, I'm sorry, she said quickly, standing. I was just... Richard raised a hand, stopping her. Don't, he said quietly, his voice unsteady. Please, continue. The twins looked between them, confused. Richard's gaze remained fixed on Maria, not in anger but in awe. Because in that moment, he realized the most important lessons his daughters were learning were not coming from him, and he wasn't sure whether to feel threatened or grateful. Maria stood awkwardly, her hands clasped in front of her, waiting for Richard to dismiss her. Years of working in wealthy homes had taught her that stepping outside her role, especially teaching the employer's children, was rarely forgiven. But Richard didn't speak right away. He lowered himself onto the sofa, his eyes still on his daughters. Girls, he said gently, why don't you go finish your homework in the study? But Daddy, Lily began. Please, he added, smiling softly. Reluctantly, the twins gathered their books and left, glancing back at Maria as if afraid she'd disappear. The room fell silent. I didn't hire you to teach, Richard said at last. Maria's heart sank. I understand, sir. It won't happen again. That's not what I meant, he replied. I didn't hire you to teach, yet you may be teaching them something I never did. Maria looked up, surprised. Richard leaned forward. Where did you learn to speak like that? About responsibility. About kindness. Maria hesitated, then answered quietly. From my mother. We were poor. Sometimes we had only 1 loaf of bread for 5 people. She always said sharing it made us stronger, not weaker. Richard absorbed her words. He thought of his daughters' closets full of clothes, their shelves crowded with toys, and the emptiness that often lingered behind their smiles. You've lost people, haven't you? He asked. Maria nodded. My husband. He died working 2 jobs so our son could go to school. Kindness was all we had left to give. Something tightened in Richard's chest. How long have you been telling them these things? He asked. Only when they ask, Maria said quickly. They're good girls. They're curious. Richard stood and walked to the window, staring out at the manicured garden. For years he had measured success in numbers, profits, growth, influence. Yet a woman he barely noticed had been quietly shaping his daughters into compassionate human beings. He turned back to her. Would you be willing, he said slowly, to continue teaching them? Maria's eyes widened. Sir? Not instead of school, he clarified, but alongside it. Teach them what life taught you. Tears welled in Maria's eyes. I don't know if I'm qualified. Richard smiled sadly. Neither was I, when I thought money was enough. At that moment, the twins peeked around the corner, listening. Richard beckoned them over. Girls, he said, resting a hand on each of their shoulders. Maria has something important to share with us. All of us. Maria looked at the children, then at Richard, and nodded. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a mansion. It felt like a home. The lessons didn't stop in the living room. Over the weeks that followed, Maria began spending a few minutes each day with Lily and Emma, sometimes while baking, sometimes while folding laundry, sometimes just sitting on the back steps watching the sun dip behind the trees. She taught them small things: how to listen before speaking, how to notice when someone felt invisible, how to say thank you and mean it. Richard watched from a distance at first. Then he began to listen. One evening, as Maria helped the girls write thank you notes to the gardeners, Richard stayed behind after the twins went to bed. There's something I should tell you, Maria said softly, her voice trembling. Richard nodded. I'm listening. My husband, she continued, once worked for a company that promised him stability. Overtime, benefits, safety. They cut corners. One night, a machine malfunctioned. He didn't come home. Richard's stomach dropped. What was the company's name? He asked quietly. Maria swallowed. Hale Industrial Services. The room seemed to tilt. That was Richard's first company, the one he had sold years ago to build his empire. The accident had been buried in legal settlements and forgotten reports. I didn't know, Richard whispered. I never blamed you, Maria said gently. I blamed the system, and I chose not to let bitterness raise my son or your daughters. Tears filled Richard's eyes for the first time in decades. He realized that the wealth he built stood in part on invisible sacrifices. The next morning, Richard made a decision. He reopened the case. He set up a trust for Maria's son. He restructured safety policies across all his companies, and he didn't do it quietly. At dinner that night, Richard sat with his daughters and said, Being rich isn't about what you take. It's about what you fix. Maria smiled, tears streaming. Years later, Lily and Emma would tell people that their greatest teacher wasn't found in any school, but in the kindness of a woman who showed them how to be human. And Richard would say that coming home early that day made him richer than any deal ever could, because the lesson he walked in on changed everything.